Mami la Tapi. This term originates from the Yagan language of Tierra del Fuego. It defines the silent look shared by two individuals who both desire to initiate an interaction but are paralyzed by the fear of rejection. From an evolutionary perspective, human survival depended entirely on social inclusion within the tribe. Rejection was a literal death sentence in prehistoric environments. Consequently, the modern human brain processes social exclusion through the anterior cingulate cortex, the exact same neural pathway that registers physical tissue damage. When two people share this gaze, their nervous systems are locked in a high-stakes standoff. Both parties calculate the immediate transaction costs of emotional vulnerability. They choose stalemate over potential status loss. The brain prefers the agonizing safety of perpetual uncertainty over the definitive ego trauma of a potential negative response. This behavioral paralysis reveals the transactional nature of human attraction. Each individual waits for the other to lower their psychological defenses first. It is an unconscious game of chicken where the currency is social dominance. The person who initiates the interaction immediately yields power by signaling high interest and low options. The receiver obtains instant leverage. To avoid this power asymmetry, both minds default to a state of defensive preservation. They actively choose to maintain a comfortable illusion of mutual interest rather than risk uncovering a humiliating asymmetry. This phenomenon demonstrates that human romantic interactions are not governed by genuine connection, but by strict risk management protocols. We would rather let a biologically viable pairing dissolve into nothingness than suffer a minor blow to our perceived social value. The douleur exquise. This French expression captures the specific psychological torment of desiring someone who remains permanently out of reach. The human brain is a prediction machine designed to seek out scarce resources. When a desired romantic target is unattainable, the brain does not shut down the pursuit mechanism. Instead, it enters a state of hyperactivation. This occurs because intermittent reinforcement schedules generate the highest levels of dopamine. The unavailability of the target acts as an amplifier for obsession. The mind interprets the lack of reciprocity as an existential challenge to its self-worth. It constructs an idealized mental avatar of the target, stripped of all realistic human flaws. The victim becomes addicted to their own unfulfilled longing. They confuse the painful chemical withdrawal of unrequited attention with deep spiritual connection. This dynamic is essentially a masturbatory emotional loop. The suffering individual does not actually love the distant person. They love the dramatic narrative of their own tragic martyrdom. Loving an unattainable figure is highly convenient for the subconscious mind. It provides a perfect shield against the messy, terrifying realities of actual intimacy. Real relationships require compromise, vulnerability, and exposure to mundane flaws. An unattainable fantasy requires none of these challenges. It remains pristine, perfect, and completely controllable within the confines of the suffering ego. The victim clings to this exquisite pain because it elevates their ordinary existence into a grand tragedy. Human beings possess an infinite capacity to manufacture internal suffering simply to feel uniquely significant in a cold, indifferent universe. Razlubiti. This Russian verb denotes the exact process of losing affection for someone you once loved. Culturally, love is sold as an eternal, mystical force. Biologically, it is merely a temporary chemical cocktail designed to facilitate reproduction and initial child-rearing. The initial infatuation phase relies heavily on phenylethylamine, dopamine, and norepinephrine. This hormonal high has an expiration date of roughly 18 to 36 months. Once the habituation process completes, the brain ceases to secrete these neurochemicals in response to the partner. The illusion of perfection dissolves. The partner's unique quirks mutate into irritating biological anomalies. The brain begins to register the partner's presence as baseline noise rather than a reward signal. This transition is not a tragedy. It is the cold, predictable operation of human evolutionary biology resetting its baseline. When this shift occurs, the psychological contract undergoes a forced renegotiation. The individual realizes that their intense emotional investment was merely a biological trick. They look at their partner and feel nothing but a flat, clinical indifference. This state is highly disturbing because it highlights the utter fragility of human commitments. The promises made during the chemical psychosis of early dating now seem absurd and binding. The brain immediately starts calculating the escape costs versus the maintenance costs of the relationship. We like to believe our loyalty is a product of moral character and deep soul connection. The grim reality is that our capacity to care is entirely dependent on a fickle chemical balance that can switch off without our conscious consent. Saudade.
This Portuguese term describes a profound, melancholic longing for an absent individual who may never return. It is more than simple sadness. It is a passive state of emotional habitation. The human brain struggles immensely with permanent loss. It possesses an innate bias toward loss aversion, valuing what it has lost far more than what it could potentially gain. When a partner departs, the brain experiences a severe cognitive deficit. It continues to run neural simulations of the missing person to resolve the sudden lack of input. The individual actively nurtures this grief because it serves as an artificial bridge to the past. They hoard memories like valuable resources, refusing to let them fade into natural obscurity.
The pain becomes a physical anchor to a dead reality. This state of permanent longing is a form of emotional hoarding. The sufferer uses the pain of the absence to avoid facing the terrifying blank slate of the present. By maintaining this internal monument to the lost relationship, they excuse themselves from the effort of seeking new connections. New connections carry the risk of new rejections and new pain. Melancholy is safe. It is predictable, solitary, and requires absolutely nothing from the individual, except quiet wallowing. The brain tricks itself into believing that keeping the grief alive somehow preserves the value of the original connection. It is a pathetic attempt to cheat time and biology. We willingly paralyze our own futures just to worship the rotting corpses of our dead memories. Koi no yokan. This Japanese concept refers to the immediate sensation upon meeting someone that you will inevitably fall in love with them. It differs from love at first sight because it is not an instant attraction, but a premonition of future attachment. Modern neuroscience explains this phenomenon through predictive coding. The brain is constantly analyzing environmental cues, facial symmetry, pheromones, and behavioral patterns against a pre-existing template of survival needs. When a stranger matches this internal template with high accuracy, the brain projects a trajectory of inevitable bond formation. It is not destiny. It is a highly sophisticated, rapid-fire statistical calculation. The subconscious mind recognizes a high-yield genetic and social resource and prepares the conscious ego for the heavy emotional investment that will follow. This premonition initiates a powerful confirmation bias. Once the brain decides that a specific relationship is inevitable, it actively filters out all contradictory data. It ignores red flags, rationalizes incompatible traits, and exaggerates minor synchronicities. The individual begins to behave in ways that actively force the predicted outcome, turning a statistical hunch into a self-fulfilling prophecy. We mistake this mechanical cognitive alignment for cosmic intervention or spiritual alignment. In reality, it is merely the ego comforting itself by manufacturing a narrative of predestined fate. The human mind is so terrified of the chaotic, random nature of social interactions that it must invent the illusion of destiny to justify its own biochemical impulses. Forelskit. This Norwegian word describes the intoxicating, obsessive euphoria experienced when one first begins to fall in love. In clinical terms, this state is virtually indistinguishable from a mild, temporary mental illness. The brain of an individual in this phase shows a dramatic reduction in serotonin levels, matching the neural profile of patients diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Concurrently, the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, the areas responsible for critical judgment and fear assessment, are severely deactivated. The individual is literally incapable of objective reasoning. They perceive their target of affection through a lens of absolute delusion, projecting godlike qualities onto an ordinary biological organism. This chemical hijacking is an evolutionary mechanism designed to blind the individual to the partner's flaws long enough to secure copulation. This state of evolutionary intoxication is highly unstable. It cannot be sustained long-term without causing severe cognitive and physical exhaustion. The body cannot run on perpetual adrenaline and dopamine without experiencing physiological burnout. Eventually, the chemical levels must drop, and the prefrontal cortex will inevitably reboot. When the cognitive fog clears, the individual is forced to confront the actual human being sitting across from them. The transition from chemical delusion to cold reality is often jarring and destructive. The individual feels betrayed, believing the magic has died, when, in fact, they have simply sobered up. We praise this temporary insanity as the highest peak of human experience, ignoring the fact that it is merely a biochemical trap designed to trick us into reproducing. Ya Bernie. This Arabic phrase translates literally to "you bury me," representing the desire to die before a loved one because life without them is unendurable. While romanticized as the ultimate expression of devotion, this sentiment represents extreme pathological codependency.
From a survival standpoint, an organism that ties its own viability to the survival of another has committed a major evolutionary error. The brain's primary directive is self-preservation. When an individual adopts this mindset, their neural reward system has become entirely hijacked by a single external source. The ego has fully dissolved into the identity of another person. This is not a healthy union. It is the complete surrender of individual sovereignty. The mind is so terrified of the pain of grief that it prefers absolute non-existence over coping with reality. This extreme devotion is a form of emotional parasitism disguised as selflessness. The individual demands that their partner remain alive to sustain their own psychological equilibrium. It places an immense, unfair cognitive burden on the partner who is made responsible for the other person's literal will to live. This dynamic destroys the natural balance of a relationship, transforming it into a hostage situation where the weapon is potential self-destruction. The subconscious motivation behind this desire is not love, but a desperate attempt to escape the inevitable reality of loneliness. We find beauty in this total surrender because we are terrified of our own isolation. We would rather celebrate the mutual destruction of two identities than face the cold truth of our fundamental, solitary existence. Ilunga. This word from the Chiluba language refers to a person who is ready to forgive any abuse the first time, to tolerate it the second time, but to never forgive or tolerate it a third time. In evolutionary psychology, this behavior matches the famous tit-for-tat strategy in game theory. Social survival requires a delicate balance between altruism and self-protection. An individual who forgives indefinitely is an evolutionary sucker, easily exploited by social predators. An individual who never forgives is a social pariah, unable to maintain cooperative alliances. The three-strike rule is a highly efficient algorithm developed to manage social resources. It allows for occasional errors or external factors, but swiftly terminates investment once a pattern of exploitation is established. It is a cold mathematical calculation of trust. This structured approach to forgiveness exposes the transactional nature of human relationships. We do not forgive out of genuine moral superiority or spiritual purity. We forgive because we are calculating the long-term utility of the relationship against the cost of finding a replacement partner. The first strike is dismissed as an anomaly to protect our initial emotional investment. The second strike is tolerated to avoid the immediate discomfort of conflict and separation. By the third strike, the mathematical probability of continued exploitation becomes too high to ignore. At this point, the ego swiftly shuts down all empathy to protect its remaining resources. Our capacity for mercy is not infinite. It is a strictly metered biological currency that we withdraw the moment the return on investment drops below zero.